76 days. That's how long attackers walked in and out of Equifax, one of the biggest credit bureaus on earth, while nobody watched the door. When it ended, about 147 million people were exposed, and the bill for that one governance failure passed $575 million. And here's the loop to hold the whole way through. Not one step of that breach needed a genius attacker. It needed a company to ignore its own security governance, and there's a single boring document Equifax already owned that would have stopped all of it.
Kim here, and the patch is the part everyone skims past. In March of 2017, the fix for the exact flaw they got breached through already existed. It shipped publicly, rated maximum severity, months before anyone touched their systems. Equifax had roughly 2 months to apply it and never did. Read that carefully. They didn't lack the patch, and they didn't lack the policy. A patch management rule on paper meant nothing because nobody enforced the timeline it demanded. The rule existed, the follow-through did not.
This is the driest corner of Security Plus. It's Domain 5.1, Security Governance, and we're going deeper on it than any slide ever will. It looks like paperwork. It's the reason the whole breach happened, and it's worth real points. Domain 5 is a full 20% of your exam, and governance questions hide on the razor edge between words that sound almost identical. Policy, standard, procedure, guideline. They feel interchangeable until a question forces you to pick exactly one. Master those edges and the driest topic on the exam turns into the easiest points on it.
Hey everyone, Leo here, and the certificate angle is the part that still stuns me. Equifax let 324 of its own security certificates expire. Not one, 324. One of them sat on the device that inspects their own outbound traffic. It had been dead for 19 months. So while the attackers quietly siphoned data out, the company's own monitoring was staring at an encrypted stream it literally could not read. The tool wasn't broken. The alerts weren't switched off. The one certificate that let it see inside the traffic had simply expired, and nobody owned the job of renewing it.
This is Lewis, and we've already run this experiment, so the ending is not a surprise. A certificate renewal policy is the most boring page in the building. Nobody gets promoted for writing one, but the day an engineer finally renewed that one expired certificate, the monitoring woke up and flagged the intrusion inside a day. The control was never missing. The discipline to keep it alive was. That gap has a name, and the name is governance. One enforced rule breaks the whole chain.
So let me actually draw that chain. Because watching each failure hand off to the next is the entire lesson of this domain.
4 links. The patch went unapplied, so the flaw stayed wide open. The expired certificate then blinded the monitoring, so the theft ran unseen. And for 76 days, nobody was watching the door. Break any single one of those links and the breach simply never happens. That's what governance actually buys you. Not one heroic save at the last second, but 4 ordinary disciplines, any one of which was enough on its own. Nobody gets a bonus for renewing a certificate on time. That quiet follow-through is the whole job, and it's the one thing no policy can do for you if nobody enforces it.
And here's the part the exam quietly rewards. After the breach, the accountability didn't land on some junior admin. The chief executive, the chief information officer, and the chief security officer all departed. A breach stopped being an engineering problem and became a board level one. That's the shift this whole domain is built on. When a board can lose its own seats over one breach, governance stops being an IT checkbox and becomes something the top of the company actually owns.
Hold that thought, because it's the exact reason NIST later rebuilt its whole framework, and we close the episode on it. Kim, you keep seeing one question under every governance video. Set it up for us.
It's the same one every single time, so here it is, word for word. What is the actual difference between a policy, a standard, a procedure, or a guideline? People blur all 4, and CompTIA writes questions right on the seams.
Perfect anchor for the whole episode. We'll settle those 4 words cold. Then the structure question, the data roles that fail more people than anything, and the framework change that rewrote board accountability. One quick thing before we dig in. If you're studying for this exam, there are free practice quizzes and study guides waiting at certs.professorerica.com, so go drill Domain 5 while this is fresh. Kim, the floor is yours.
Four documents sit in a hierarchy, and each one answers a completely different question. Get the hierarchy and a whole question family on the exam turns into easy points. So let me settle it cold. Think of building a house. The policy is the architect saying this will be a safe home. The standard is the building code that says load-bearing walls use a specific grade of steel. The procedure is the contractor's checklist for pouring the foundation in the correct order. And the guideline is the decorator's advice on paint that ages well. Take it or leave it.
Policy first, and it's the one people undervalue. A policy is high-level intent. It's short, it's mandatory, and it's signed by senior leadership. And a policy says what and why, never how. All employees will protect customer data. That's a complete policy. Notice it hands you zero technical detail. That's on purpose.
Standards come next, and the source is precise here. A standard is the specific mandatory rule that makes a policy measurable. Where the policy says protect customer data, the standard says exactly how strong that protection has to be. Encryption at rest will use Advanced Encryption Standard 256. Web traffic will use Transport Layer Security 1.2 or higher. Passwords will run at least 14 characters. Those are all standards. Specific, mandatory, and measurable. They're the kind of line an auditor can pass or fail you against with a plain yes or no. That testability is the whole reason standards exist. A policy you can't measure is just a wish. A standard is how you turn that wish into something you can actually check.
Procedures are where the real work lives. A procedure is the exact ordered step-by-step sequence to carry a standard out. Step 1. Open the key management console. Step 2. Generate the 256-bit key. A brand new hire could follow it on day 1 with no judgment calls. But repeatability is the entire point. A standard tells you where the finish line is. A procedure walks you there the same way every time, so the result never depends on who happened to be on shift.
And a policy isn't just words on a shelf either. Somebody with authority signs it, which is what turns intent into a rule everyone has to follow.
So let me stack the 4 by force. Because seeing the levels drop is what makes it stick. Policy, then standard, then procedure, then guideline. The force drops at every step. The first 3 are mandatory. The last one is not.
And that last level is the single most tested trap in this whole topic. A guideline is recommended, never mandatory.
So the second you see the word recommended, it's a guideline, not a policy.
Right, and that's the exact tell. Recommended, or should consider, or best practice. Any of that softness and the document is a guideline. Mandatory language points at a policy or a standard. That one distinction rescues you on 2 or 3 questions, guaranteed.
One nuance the exam respects. Standards are mandatory, but the real world needs an escape hatch, so mature programs run a formal exception process. You document why a system can't meet a standard, who approved the deviation and when it gets fixed, and the approval matters more than the exception itself. A risk owner with real authority signs off, accepts the leftover risk in writing and sets an expiry date. An exception with no owner and no end date isn't an exception, it's just a hole somebody forgot to close.
And CompTIA doesn't stop at the hierarchy. Objective 5.1 names specific policy types by name, and they show up as scenario questions constantly. Lewis, walk us through the 5 that matter most.
5 named policies. Start with the Acceptable Use Policy, the AUP. It defines what an employee may and may not do with company systems. No personal file sharing on the work laptop is a classic AUP line.
Then the pair people always swap. Business continuity, the BC policy, keeps the business running during a disruption. Disaster recovery, the DR policy, restores systems after one. Hold it in one breath. Continuity is staying up. Recovery is getting back up.
Next is Incident Response, the IR policy. It's the playbook for the moment a breach is detected. Who gets called, who isolates the host, who talks to legal. And here's the sting. Equifax actually had one. It just sat unread while the certificates expired. A policy nobody rehearses is theater, not governance.
And the fifth is the Software Development Lifecycle Policy, the SDLC. It bakes security into how code gets built, reviewed, and shipped, instead of bolting it on at the very end. Secure by design, governed from the first commit.
One thread ties all 5 together, and the exam tests it. A policy isn't written once and framed on a wall. It carries an owner, a version number, and a review date. It gets reviewed at least once a year, or right after any major change. That review cycle is the governance itself. A rule nobody revisits quietly drifts out of step with the systems it protects, until one day it's guarding a network that no longer exists.
Which is precisely where Equifax failed. The policies existed, the maintenance that keeps them real did not. A governing document nobody updates is just a fossil with a logo on it. Now, before any of those rules get written, one bigger question has to be answered first. Who gets to decide? Real quick, because this next part matters to you. If any of this is helping, tap that like button, then hit subscribe and ring the bell so the next one finds you. Both are free and take about a second, but they tell the algorithm to show this to one more person who needs it. Every organization has to answer one structural question before it writes a single policy. Who decides? Objective 5.1 calls this governance structures, and it wants you to know boards, committees, and where authority actually lives. And this isn't abstract trivia. Where you place that authority decides how fast the organization can act, and who takes the fall when something breaks. There's a real fork here, so let's argue it out properly. Picture a regional hospital network, 12 sites making one choice. One central security committee that sets every rule for everyone, or each site running its own governance. Kim thinks one central authority is the only defensible answer. Leo thinks pushing decisions to the edge wins. Kim, make your case.
Centralized governance, and the evidence backs me. One board, one committee, one set of policies for all 12 sites. You get consistency and a single audit trail. When a regulator asks who's accountable, there's one answer, not 12 people pointing at each other. And consistency is a security control in itself. 12 sites inventing 12 versions of a password rule means 11 of them are probably weaker than the best one. Fragmented ownership is exactly where breaches love to hide.
I'd put real money on the other read. A committee in one headquarters building can't know the cancer center's workflow or the rural clinic's bandwidth. Decentralized governance pushes the decision to the people who actually live the risk. It moves faster, and it fits reality instead of a slide.
Hold on, Leo. Before you sell me on speed, answer one thing.
Go ahead, hit me.
When 12 sites each make their own call, and one of them leaks records, who exactly does the regulator fine?
Fair hit. I'll concede the edge there. Pure decentralization does blur accountability, and a regulator hates a blurred answer. But pure centralization is too slow to patch a site-specific hole before someone walks through it. Honestly, neither pure extreme survives contact with a real hospital. The best answer has to borrow from both.
Then we've actually converged because there's a name for the middle. Centralized policy with decentralized execution. The board sets the non-negotiable standards and each site writes its own procedures to meet them.
And let me name the structures the exam puts in the answer choices, because the words are exact. A board of directors sits at the top. It owns the ultimate accountability and approves the highest level policy and the risk appetite.
Below the board sit committees. A security steering committee turns the board's intent into direction and priorities. A change advisory board reviews and approves changes so one rushed update doesn't break production. That change process is its own whole episode. The point here is just that a committee is where oversight becomes routine instead of heroic.
And that cadence is the muscle Equifax never built. Committees meet on a schedule, review the risk register, and confirm a policy is actually being followed, not just filed away. That's the whole difference between governance on paper and governance that works. The exam nuance is the direction of flow. Accountability flows up to the board. Authority to set policy flows down from it. A committee advises and executes, but it never absorbs the board's accountability. The board can delegate the work. It can never delegate the blame.
which is actually the strongest argument for centralizing the standards. One steering committee can see across all 12 sites at once. 12 separate committees would each be flying blind to the others, and a regulator would have nowhere consistent to look. I came in for the edge, and the accountability question pulled me back.
So here's my verdict, and it's the one both ISO 27001 and the NIST framework back. My recommendation is centralized authority over the standards with decentralized execution underneath it. Decentralize the how, never decentralize the accountability. So when a question hands you a multi-site organization and asks where governance authority should sit, the answer centralizes the policy and the standards and lets local teams own the steps. Now stick with me because the next distinction fails more people than any other in this whole domain. And wait until you see how a single wrong word in an answer choice flips it. Who actually has to obey those standards and who merely touches the data.
Four words decide more governance questions than almost anything else on this exam, and most people walk in mixing them up. Owner, controller, processor, custodian. The exam swaps them like a shell game. Get these four straight and you pocket points that quietly wreck the people who didn't.
Before you define them, give us one story and run all four roles through it. That's honestly the only way they stop blurring for me.
Gladly. Picture Maria, a hospital chief information officer. She's the data owner for every patient record, and she never touches a database in her life. She sets the rules, and she carries the blame when something breaks. That's the owner in one line. Senior, accountable, rule setting. And here's the tell for the exam. The owner is the person the board calls when the records leak, even though she has never run a single query in her life.
And the source puts accountability, not hands on the keyboard, at the center of that role. The owner answers for the data even when other people handle it all day. Senior, and on the hook.
Now the pair people always swap. Picture a restaurant. The controller is the head chef who designs the menu and decides what gets cooked and why. The processor is the line cook who makes exactly what the chef ordered, no improvising. Controller is the GDPR word, and this is where it gets sharp. The controller decides the why and the how of processing. That decision is the entire job.
So when Maria's hospital picks a billing company and tells it what to do with patient data, the hospital is the controller. It chose to collect those records and it decided why. Defining the purpose is the deciding act, and it's the one thing that never moves. It doesn't matter who stores the data or who runs the servers. Whoever decided the purpose is the controller, full stop.
And the billing company is the processor. A processor only acts on the controller's instructions. It never picks the purpose on its own. That single boundary is the most tested line in the whole set.
Let me lay the roles against what each one actually does, because a table is where this trap goes to die. Owner and controller decide. Processor and custodian only touch 2 columns, and every wrong answer lives in the gap between them.
Custodian, sometimes called the steward, is the last role. That's the database administrator or the IT team doing the day-to-day handling. The backups, the access control, the encryption keys. Picture Devon, a database administrator on Maria's team. Devon runs the backups and manages the keys every single day, but never sets the policy and never picks the purpose. Pure hands-on. The custodian guards the data. The owner still answers for it.
So here's your one-line rescue for the whole set. The processor and the custodian only act. The owner and the controller decide. If an answer choice says a processor chose the purpose of processing, it's wrong on its face every single time. That one sentence collapses 4 confusing roles into a single question. Did this party decide, or did it just touch? Answer that and you've answered the question.
This is exactly where I want an outside voice because the controller role has real teeth in the world, not just on the exam. Let me bring in Dana Whitfield, who knows how real governance programs actually run. Dana, are you with us?
Glad to be here. Under GDPR, the legal liability rides with the controller, not the processor. So if your billing vendor leaks the records, the regulator comes to you first because you chose that vendor.
Wait, so even when the vendor is the one who actually messed up,
Even then, and that's exactly why a serious controller vets the vendor hard and binds it in a written agreement before a single record changes hands. All of that vetting is third-party risk management, a whole episode of its own that starts right here at the word controller. Appreciate you having me on.
That's the exam answer and the real one in one breath. Thanks, Dana. Kim, you've been sitting on the cloud version of this all episode. Put it to the room.
Here's the one that trips everyone. If you store customer data in a cloud provider, is the cloud provider the controller or the processor?
The cloud provider is the processor. Your company chose to collect the data and decided why, so your company is the controller. The provider only stores and processes on your instructions. The hardware never crowns anyone the decider. Only the act of choosing the purpose does that. So don't let the word cloud fool you. Renting someone else's servers never moves the decision. You decided why the data exists, so the accountability stays bolted to you.
Burn that pair in. Controller is you, processor is the cloud, and that whole chain of accountability is exactly why governance decides whether a control is ever real. The vetting, the written agreement, the liability, none of it happens on its own, which brings us to where NIST put all of this in one picture.
A policy by itself is a sentence on a shelf. A framework is what turns a pile of policies into a program an auditor will actually sign off on. Objective 5.1 names two giants and a set of outside pressures.
Start with the one that changed in 2024, because this is where the whole domain got rewritten. The NIST Cybersecurity Framework hit version 2.0. It's current exam material, so learn the new shape and not the old one. Let me put the wheel on the board, because the structure is the entire point. 6 functions now. Govern sits in the center. Around its circle, identify and protect, then detect, then respond and recover.
And the new word is the one to memorize. For years, the framework had 5 functions. Version 2.0 added govern, and it deliberately sits in the center because it informs all the others. Strategy and roles, risk appetite and oversight. It's the function that decides how seriously the other 5 get taken.
Then walk the other 5 fast so you can recite them cold. Identify is knowing your assets and your risks, because you can't protect what you don't know you have. Protect is the safeguards and the access control. Detect is spotting an event in progress. Respond is containing and managing the incident. Recover is restoring operations afterward. 5 functions doing the work, all of them now steered by govern in the middle.
And here's the real-world weight of that one addition. The reason govern became its own function is the Equifax pattern from our cold open. The controls existed, the oversight that makes anyone actually follow them did not. And this is the actual NIST document, not our redrawing of it. The 6 functions. The rings, straight from the framework release. Govern is the piece that simply did not exist before 2024, and it's free. This is the real NIST page, and anyone can read the whole framework at nist.gov. If you take one homework assignment from this episode, open the CSF 2.0 Resource Center and read what Govern actually asks for.
Now the second giant, and do not confuse their jobs. NIST CSF is a voluntary framework. ISO 27001 is a certifiable standard. That difference matters on the exam. You can be formally audited and certified against ISO. The 2022 version carries 93 controls across 4 themes. Nobody gets certified in NIST CSF because it's voluntary, not a pass or fail audit. So if a vendor brags about ISO certification, that's your tell.
And none of this lives in a vacuum, which is the last piece of the objective. External considerations drive your whole program from the outside, whether you like them or not. There are 5 to memorize. Regulatory and legal come first, then industry, and then national and global. Each one forces requirements onto you that you never got a vote on.
Mind the regulatory versus legal line, because the exam splits them. Regulatory means a rule handed down by an agency that oversees your industry. Legal means statute and contract law, including the lawsuits and the liability that follow a breach. They're related, but they aren't the same driver, and a question will make you choose between them.
Make it concrete. A hospital answers to health privacy regulators like HIPAA. A shop that takes credit cards answers to the payment card industry standard, PCI-DSS. A company with European customers answers to GDPR. National and global just means the laws of every country you operate in, which is why one cloud app can owe legal duties to a dozen places at once. Those external drivers aren't optional inputs. They become the floor your policies have to clear.
And GDPR carries the deadline the exam loves. Under Article 33, a reportable personal data breach goes to the supervisory authority without undue delay and not later than 72 hours after you become aware of it. Read that clock carefully. It starts when you become aware of the breach, not when the attacker first broke in. The fines, the audits, the privacy details all get their own episode. Here, just hold the clock and where it starts.
And circle all the way back to where we opened. Equifax exposed the records of about 147 million people, then spent years and over $500 million settling it. Every failure in that chain was a governance failure, not a clever hack. The patch policy nobody enforced. The certificate nobody renewed. The oversight nobody owned. That's why a topic that looks like dry paperwork is worth a full fifth of your score.
Carry this home. A control you own but never enforce is the same as a control you never had. That's the whole domain in one line. Every framework, every policy, and every role we covered exists to close one gap. The gap between having a rule and actually following it.
So here's the bottom line. Governance isn't the paperwork that slows security down. Governance is the function that decides whether any of your controls ever get followed. Every other domain teaches you to build a control. This one teaches you to make sure the control is actually used. NIST. Put govern in the center of the wheel for the same reason it sits at the center of your exam. Let's lock the core of this one. Policy is intent. Standard is the mandatory rule. Procedure is the steps. Guideline is only advice. Owner and controller decide. Processor and custodian only act. And NIST. Put govern at the center because oversight is what makes every other control real.
Here's your win tonight. Pick one rule at your own job and label it. Is it a policy, a standard, a procedure, or a guideline? Do that once and you'll walk into the exam reading these questions on instinct.
And next time we crack open risk management itself, the formula that turns a vague fear into an actual dollar figure on a page. If you ever wondered how a company decides a control is worth the money, that episode is the answer.
And don't lose the traps pairs from today. Guideline means recommended, never mandatory. Controller decides, processor acts. Voluntary framework versus certifiable standard. Those are near guaranteed points.
If this finally made governance click, hit like and subscribe so the whole Security Plus path lands in your feed in order. And grab the free practice quizzes at certs.professorerica.com to drill exactly this before test day, and one for the comments before we go. At your own organization, what's actually weaker? The policies on paper or the governance that's supposed to make people follow them? Tell us which gap you really live with. Taste in sources is a teachable skill. Practice it. See you next time.